What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana. It's about 6:50 p.m. where I'm at right now, and the date is May 25th, 2024. Coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is a monumental day. We are finishing our first book for our Book React series here on my channel that I'm starting. Finishing the book by Jesse Daniels, who is a sociologist, anti-racist educator, and author who penned this book in 2009, which I encourage everybody to get on Amazon for the humble price of $48.79. Though if you need the hookup on books, holla at your boy. I got the plug. You feel me? So I have already given my spiel multiple times on the importance of studying cyber racism, white supremacy online, and I've covered that before at the beginning of every video. So what we're going to do really is just read this last chapter of this book, chapter 10. I will not be covering the notes or any of the appendix, anything like that. We're only here to read like the body of the text, and we're coming to chapter 10, which is the conclusion. What do we take away from this book? What did we learn from this book? What information can we use moving forward to combat white supremacy online? And yeah, that's it. That's it. So let's go here. Chapter 10. Conclusion: racial justice and civic engagement in the digital era. Here is a quote from Martin Luther King. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism. The starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace can never become reality. Let's repeat that quote from Martin Luther King. We cannot repeat that enough. And I would like to actually read a Martin Luther King book for the Book React series. There's so many books that I really want to cover, but yeah, I'm going to try my best to get to the ones I really think are important. So I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace can never become reality. Martin Luther King Jr. White supremacy in the digital era raises important new questions about racism, racial equality, and civil rights. It also raises questions about the transformation of social movement discourse on the internet. The centerpiece in this book is an empirical investigation into white supremacist movement discourse across print and digital media that is meant to make a contribution to our understanding of the way 5 organizations within one particular social movement change their communication strategies to accommodate the information age. The 5 organizations I studied varied in their relative success or failure in making the transition from print to digital media as the result of a number of different variables: resources, group cohesion, and savvy use of interactive web features. These 5 organizations in their transition from print to digital media constitute only part of the investigation offered here. White supremacy online is a complicated social phenomenon that poses real threats, but not necessarily the threats that receive the most attention. The perceived threat of recruitment into organized racism via the internet belies a more complex reality and calls into question the definition of social movement member in the era of registered users. White supremacists are often regarded as ignorant, poor, and marginal to mainstream culture in various ways, but the manifestation of white supremacy online suggests a different reality in which the internet offers the opportunity for a racialized, gendered, and global white supremacy. This new media form of white supremacy collides with old media and white supremacy in various ways as it constructs a unified white male heteronormative subject that remains embedded in a relatively privileged position in the material offline world. The emergence of global white supremacy online supports the formation of a translocal whiteness that is simultaneously rooted in American culture and transcends national geographic borders. Digital media is neither a raceless panacea nor a dangerous place where people, particularly young people, are unsuspectingly lured into hate groups. Old forms of overt white supremacy, for example, racist hate speech, have moved into the information age alongside new emergent forms of white supremacy that include searchable databases of racially identifiable usernames easily exported for use in mass emails, along with new forms of covert white supremacy at cloaked websites, whose goal is to undermine the very idea of racial equality. domain name registration, Google rank, and graphic user interface, GUI, and the new terrain of racial politics. Gender and sexuality are key here. And as in the old print only era of white supremacy, masculinity is constitutive of white supremacy. Masculinity is constitutive of white supremacy. Yet there are new Yet there are important new dimensions as well. More women participate in white supremacy online, and they redraw the boundaries of whiteness and question white supremacist orthodoxy and male dominance in ways that include significant elements of white liberal feminism. Even so, these women remain marginalized within white supremacy online and within larger society because of structural gender inequality. Ozzy in the comments, he says, "We back, let's build." Yep, we're reading the very final chapter here, and then after the chapter, I will rate this book. I'll give my score from 1 to 10 for this book, and also I'll give my final thoughts about white supremacy online in relation to this book. Though this topic is one we could talk about for ages. Continuing here. White supremacy online matters to democratic societies committed to equality for all of its citizens. It matters because the increased ease of access to white supremacist discourse and the global linkages between groups and individuals in virtual communities like stormfront.org hold the potential for harm in real life. In addition to this potential harm, the emergence and increasing popularity of white supremacy online undermines cultural values of racial equality and inclusion. Cloak sites that challenge the advances of the civil rights movement and even question whether the end of slavery was necessary, given that it was quote unquote humane institutions shift the ground beneath taken for granted and supposedly shared values about racial equality. So basically, that's a reference back to the chapter where we talked about cloaked websites that hide their true meaning, like MartinLutherKing.org, where you click on it and you think you're going to get informative data about Martin Luther King, and then all they do is try to feed you stuff that civil rights was a mistake, slavery wasn't too bad, and Martin Luther King was a horrible person, stuff like that, right? Continuing here, white supremacy online challenges the notion that we who live in the United States have a shared culture that values all our citizens equally. Indeed, the popularity of online communities like Stormfront, which features a rotating banner of Thomas Jefferson reiterating for the digital age his colonial era belief that the quote unquote distinct races are unable to live together under one government, suggests that the white racial frame is one that resonates broadly within American culture, and epistemologies that ignore the lived experience of racial and gender inequality seem inadequate to the task of either understanding or fighting white supremacy online. The epistemology of white supremacy online. Epistemologies of race, how we know what we say we know about race and racism, are rooted in profoundly different experiences for whites and people of color living in a social context of racial inequality. Within such a context, some people experience the constant drumbeat of racism as part of everyday life, while others enjoy the privilege of ignoring it on a daily basis. The epistemological peril of white supremacy online lies in its ability to change how we know what we say we know about issues that have been politically hard-won, issues such as civil rights. Both forms of online hate speech discussed here, overt and cloaked, are grounded in an epistemology of white supremacy. The presence of overt hate speech online reinforces this epistemology by allowing white racists to retreat from civic engagement into a whites-only fantasy of superiority and victimhood. For those who create overtly white supremacist content, the internet provides a forum for amplifying racist propaganda. For those who seek it out, overt hate speech online validates essentialist notions of white racial purity, privilege, and entitlement by rearticulating white supremacy using the rhetoric of civil rights. Such a rearticulation rests on a disavowal of everyday racism and blindness to the myriad ways in which whites are privileged by race. Within a context filled with like-minded individuals and absent gatekeepers, these rearticulations set up an infinite loop within the technology, reinforcing white supremacy by design. Even for non-racist whites, the internet and white supremacy worked as reinforcing mechanisms. For well-meaning white liberals, extremists often represent an other. which signifies racism and undermines any examination of the ways white supremacy is embedded in the broader culture and institutions of the United States. For some white liberals, hate speech online is a reliable target for focusing attention on issues of racism because it is easy to point to distinctions between liberals and extremists. Yet this focus often obfuscates the more difficult investigation into the ways that white supremacy is built into the mechanisms of the dominant culture, institutions, even the technology itself, administered by those with no ties to extremist groups. Basically what she's saying here is that, the internet, even if people are not on white supremacist websites, because the world we live in outside of the internet is white supremacist, is going to bleed in that way. I brought up the example a few live streams ago talking about how, the auto-generated captions under YouTube videos, when white people speak on auto-generated captions, most of the times the dictation is perfect. Meanwhile, if a black person speaks, or a person with another form of accent or a different type of accent of English, right, that speech is often mistranslated and stuff like that. So that goes to show, like, most of the time the programmers and designers of websites do not have black people in mind as the testers, or other groups of people in mind as testers, to capture different accents and sounds and that sort of thing. But also at the same time, like, online we have discourse that still reflects the sort of talking points that people have in the real world. Like, in the real world, people say slavery wasn't that bad, or civil rights struggles were a long time ago, now everything is better. And that's sort of repeated online in mass, right? So, yeah, continuing here. Multiple literacies: digital media, anti-racism, and social justice. To fight white supremacy online, we need multiple literacies, including literacies of digital media, anti-racism, and social justice. We live in an era in which education is under siege, and so I recognize how daunting calling for multiple literacies may seem in the face of these other challenges. However, one of the reasons that digital media is so compelling, and part of the reason that it has sparked innovation, is because it opens people's minds to new possibilities and reminds us that we are, in fact, designers of our own social futures. New ways of thinking and learning have emerged. Among those leading the way in thinking about these issues are Richard Kahn and Doug Kellner, who have called for a multiple literacies approach. A multiple literacies approach combines traditional print literacy with critical media literacy and new forms of literacies about how to access, navigate, create, and participate in digital media. Digital media also pose new challenges and opportunities for parents, educators, activists, and scholars for understanding racism, anti-racism, and social justice. This is something I said in the live stream, I believe, yesterday. Every kid in America needs a class to understand digital media. We need literacy for people to know when they're looking at misinformation. And I said this in the live stream about an hour and a half ago, that anybody who purposely puts misinformation online, disinformation online, that should be a crime. Right. I know it's very hard in America to say, let's pass a law to ban white supremacy online, or to fight white supremacy online, because America is so white supremacist. But I think we could get a lot of people on board with saying we want to fight disinformation, and saying stuff like black people are less naturally intelligent, or black people thrived under slavery. That's misinformation, disinformation, and it shouldn't be allowed to permeate. That's my opinion, though. Continuing here. 10 years into the digital media revolution, our initial ways of educating young people about digital media literacy are ineffectual at best and misleading at worst. For example, one strategy widely used in internet literacy curricula is instructing students to look at the URL, especially the three-letter suffix .com, .edu, and .org. In the case of the cloaked websites, following this advice only serves to make the cloaked site appear more legitimate rather than less so. Another response popular with some parents and youth-oriented organizations is to install quote-unquote hate filters, software programs designed to filter out hate sites encountered through search engines. Those filters are woefully inadequate for addressing anything but the most overt forms of hate speech online, and even when they work as intended, they disable the critical thinking in the person using the technology, which is the central feature needed in our approach to digital media literacy. The direction that digital media literacy must take is one that promotes reading text, URL, and external and incoming links closely and carefully, as well as the skills necessary to critically interpret visual imagery and graphic design in relation to the text as they exist at this moment. Many of the white supremacist sites contain clearly amateurish graphic design and layout. When these sites grow in visual sophistication, and I think it is inevitable that they will, it will be even more difficult to detect racist propaganda. Water break. Mm. Continuing here. So, along with visual and textual literacy, the critical thinking skills needed to decipher web authorship, intended audience, and cloaked political agendas in making knowledge claims must be combined with at least some understanding of how domain name registration works. At a minimum, this is what is required to be a fully engaged, thoughtful user of the web. In my view, it is especially important for young people to become content creators actively engaged in authoring their own digital media, which helps demystify the medium in significant ways. And introducing young people to the regular use of a range of free online tools for web analysis is important as well. Technology such as Whois Registry, internic.net slash whois.html can sometimes help determine the author of a website in the absence of clear information. Alexa.com web trafficking services shows how many visitors a particular site gets and provides some analysis about how that site relates to other sites by showing which sites link to it. The free software touchgraph.com uses a Java applet to visually display the relationship between links leading to and from a site. Even though many youth are fluent in the use of digital media, they are not necessarily adept at thinking critically about digital media. And this is where adults, whether parents, teachers, activists, or scholars, can play a role in connecting them to technology that facilitates this critical thinking. However, simply being literate and even fluent in digital media is not enough for addressing the challenges of white supremacy online. Critical media literacy needs to be added to the technical skills of digital fluency. Among the advantages of incorporating principles of critical media literacy is that it calls for valuing multiple voices as well as deconstructing images produced by corporate-owned media. Understanding multiple perspectives is an important corrective to the racism, sexism, and homophobia generated by corporate owned media outlets. And as Henry Jenkins has rightfully pointed out, this is a vital contribution of participatory media. However, I want to add a small but significant corrective to the idea of valuing multiple perspectives by suggesting that not all perspectives are to be valued equally. If, quote unquote, valuing multiple perspectives is our only standard, then we have no basis on which to critically distinguish between a cloaked website and a legitimate civil rights website. No way to evaluate the content generated by the King Center over that produced by the cloaked site martinlutherking.org. The usual approach within critical media literacy of quote unquote understanding multiple perspectives is simply not adequate to the task of resisting white supremacy online. If we merely advocate valuing multiple perspectives without regard to content, there is no way to distinguish between different perspectives, no basis for a vision of social justice. Alongside digital media literacy and critical media literacy, we need to develop literacies of racism, anti-racism, and social justice. Most whites in the United States have very little understanding of the historical context of racial oppression, and very few have a depth of understanding that might fairly be termed racial literacy. These issues are particularly relevant for youth. Part of the empirical investigation in this book focused on interviews with young people, and it is young people who are often seen as holding the promise of transforming the intergenerational transmission of white supremacy. However, disrupting the inheritance of white supremacy does not happen on its own, inevitably nor automatically. It requires thoughtful, engaged, and ethically informed education joined with political action to transform structured inequality. Young people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds need to read histories of the United States that include critical race perspectives and critiques of entrenched power elites. Youth of color need critical consciousness to go with lived experiences of everyday racism. And white youth need to begin the lifelong process of unlearning the epistemology of white supremacy, which hobbles them by blinding them to racial inequality. Bringing these multiple literacies together, visual and textual literacy, critical media literacy, and a racial literacy informed by an ethic of social justice, will empower young people to resist white supremacy, whether overt or cloaked, whether online in digital media or offline in culture and in situation and in institutions. Pardon. The possibilities of these multiple literacies should give us tremendous hope for the future when it comes to fighting white supremacy online. None of the small sample of young people I interviewed for the study, nor indeed any of the students I have met teaching in the urban northeastern United States, are, in my view, in any serious danger of being recruited into organized white supremacist movement organizations. But I do see some convincing evidence that for young people who are often fluent in digital media, but not in critical media literacy, or who do not have an understanding of racial inequality, the cloaked white supremacist sites do pose a serious threat to how they understand the history of civil rights in this country, how they view civil rights in the present, and how they view value racial equality and human rights in a global society. The good news is that those who already possess those multiple literacies and have an ethic of caring can pass that on intergenerationally, and some are doing that well already. What we have not done particularly well in the United States after the civil rights movement is to engage in civic life in a way that are meaningful transforms the core elements of white supremacy built into our culture and institutions. Even as the United States has elected its first African American president in its history, and many point to this as an harbinger of a new post racial quote unquote era, the stark facts of racial inequality remain grimly in place. Some 40% of black children still grow up in poverty. Black women are more likely to give birth to low birth weight babies, regardless of income or education. And young black men are more likely to go to prison than to college. The fact that one family has moved into the White House certainly signifies a blow to white supremacy, but not the end of the struggle against it. In order to change the deeply embedded white supremacy in our culture and institutions, we have to first acknowledge that it exists, and then we must become more engaged in civic life. Very quickly, because there are some people who are probably listening right now, but they're silent, or people who are thinking this but don't want to say it. Um, you know, just because Obama became president doesn't mean that we are now in a post-racial America, or that we are in a post-racial world. In some ways, Obama's presidency validated white supremacy of America's foreign policy and domestic policy. Because if a black man can implement the same sort of wickedness that the U.S. president has to do intrinsically as a part of the job, then that shows that white supremacy is deep within us, within our society, and it needs to be challenged. Something that I wanted to say, though, earlier she was talking about how children need to have literacy of several different types: media literacy, racial literacy, print literacy, and stuff like that. I think it's also important for us to try to reach out to adults as well, because I believe if we continue to say, you know what, we just need to better educate the youth, that's one thing. But we could educate the young people all we want, but if they go home and their parents are just saying N word, N word, N word, this, and talking about how the immigrants are bringing disease, crime, and some of them are rapists and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter what you teach a kid at school if they go home to a racist ass parent. There should be some sort of education for adults as well, and people who hold those views, to challenge those views and that sort of stuff. And that's the reason why I do my live streams, right? Because every time I do one of these live streams, I have to mark this is not meant for children. So, my videos are only being watched by presumably adults, but, kids can get around that stuff easily. But the thing is, right, just hoping that the next generation will fix the problems of today is a sick way of looking at it, right? Like it's saying that the next generation will fix racism is like also saying the next generation can fix climate change, right? We right now are the ones who are destroying the planet, putting the most carbon monoxide in the atmosphere. But then we kick the can down the road and say, yeah, well, the kids will fix it. No, the kids can't fix something that continues to get broken over and over, especially the planet. And our societies are fragile, right? So, we should not continue to hope, okay, just because my daughter or son married a black guy or a girl or whatever, or just because they're not as racist as their grandfather, that we're actually going to get past racism. Okay, so let's try to give literacy, anti-racist literacy, media literacy to all Americans and to all adult people, and try our best to educate everybody about these things. Okay. All right. Ozzy says exactly. It all starts at home. Exactly. Racism starts at home. Nobody is born hating any other group of people, but it is taught to them, and it is. It might not be explicitly taught. Your parents don't even have to be saying N word, N word, N word. This, but your parents could be saying stuff like, "Everybody in America gets exactly what they deserve," and everybody has to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And my parents came here with nothing. Therefore, nobody has any excuses as to why they are unsuccessful in America, right? Those sorts of comments that a lot of white folks get told when they're younger, and also a lot of black folks too, is the reason why our society constantly is on this hamster wheel, why we cannot make any social progress, racial progress in America, because of ideas like that continue to exist in our society, right? So all I'm saying is that educate the old folks is what I mean. Continuing here. Civic engagement. Given the presence of white supremacy online, those who are neophytes to digital media may express trepidation about going online at all. Yet I contend that we should engage in civic activism online, not in spite of the presence of white supremacy online, but precisely because of it. For those of us who are concerned with racial equality, civil rights, and democratic ideals, then civic engagement via the internet offers a tremendous opportunity for speaking out against injustice. C. Wright Mills recognized this urgent need to speak out against injustice when he wrote that, quote unquote, every time intellectuals have the chance to speak yet do not speak, they join the forces that train people not to be able to think and imagine and feel in morally and politically adequate ways. Let's repeat that quote. Every time intellectuals have the choice to speak yet do not speak when they join the forces, every time intellectuals have the chance to speak yet do not speak, they join the forces that train people not to be able to think and imagine and feel in morally and politically adequate ways. Basically, he's saying, like, when the intellectuals don't speak or give guidance or try to help people, they're ceding ground to the people that want to mislead people, and they're not helping people reach a higher version of themselves, right? You know, a lot of people say going to college might not be worth it in America because you're going into debt, or you shouldn't study the humanities. But I'm glad I went into the humanities, and I'm glad I'm going back into the humanities, because any donation, anytime you watch this channel, it's helping pay for my college tuition to study sociology, to become a professor. You know, I'm glad I studied the humanities, because taking those philosophy classes, those ethics classes, classes on morality, classes on religion, taught me how to think. Not what to think, but how to think. And I'm very grateful for that, right? Because that's the number one thing that's missing in our society today. People that know how to be critical of the information they receive. Continuing here. In this passage, Mills was challenging his fellow academics to speak out against the increasing militarization of global politics, and his analysis is as cogent and relevant today as when it was written in 1958. I agree with Mills and his sociological heirs like Stanley Aronowitz, who argue that a new democratic public needs a reinvigorated civic life. Part of what is necessary for that to be realized is an impassioned, radical critique of a hegemonic American elite that threatens democratic institutions in the United States and around the world through an increasingly militarized presence, and by promoting a locked down global society that systematically and efficiently reproduces racial inequality. One of the differences between when Mills was writing and now is that the quote unquote chance to speak in the digital era is ever present. For example, when people wanted to mobilize a protest against the racial injustices of the criminal prosecution and incarceration of 6 African American teens in Jena, Louisiana, they organized that protest almost entirely through digital media, including email, blogs, Facebook, MySpace, and YouTube. One young man who joined the protest of almost 10,000 people said one of the things about it that inspired they are leading the way in digital civil rights activism and civic engagement. And African American women have long been engaged in civic activism online, organizing the Million Woman March using digital media back in 1999. Today, it is Black women bloggers that continue to focus attention and activism on the Dunbar Village atrocity, challenging both white dominated mainstream media indifference to race and the gender biased, male dominated civil rights activists. For those of us who share Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision and reject the view that we are all so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism that peace and justice can never become reality, civic engagement online offers real hope for organizing political activism to make that vision real. The shifting terrain of race, civil rights, and white supremacy online compels us to think critically about how we make and evaluate knowledge claims within digital media, how we develop and teach multiple literacies, how we articulate a vision for social justice, and whether or not we become engaged in political struggle for equality in the information age will determine whether we will carry forward hard-won civil rights victories and the ideals of a democratic society here and abroad, or we will relinquish them in the dawn of a new global era of white supremacy. And that is the end of the book. Of course, there's the methodology appendix on the craft of sociology in the digital era. I would not be reading that because that goes into the details of how she put all of this together. Of course, that's important, but I wanted to really just get her key ideas. Okay. Continuing here, what else we have? We have the notes section, and in the rest of the book, we have the references here, and also there is the appendix. The appendix is somewhere back here as well in this book. So we finished the book. We finished the book. I want to say thank you to Ozzy. Shout out to Nelson Moreno, Avery Adams, Acton and Shaheen Hill, everybody who's been supporting me in reading this book, Cyber Racism. I'm very glad that we were able to actually get this done and do it. And I started this project on Monday? And now it's Saturday, and we finished the entire book. All right. And I'm not going to say I'm proud of myself, but I'm proud of all of y'all for sticking with me and being involved in this project. It's something I want to continue to do. You know, a lot of people say, I don't have the time to read. A lot of people say, I don't have time to read. I can't find the minutes, the hours, the days to sit down and read, right? And I think we shouldn't try to make excuses for things that are important to do. You find time to go to the gym. You find time to, catch up on your favorite series. You find time to watch a bunch of movies. You should also find time to read and learn and expand your mind. And I learned so much from this book. This is an excellent book. I encourage other people to buy it, pick it up. This is not a paid endorsement, by the way. I don't know Jessie Daniels, and I'm pretty sure if Jessie Daniels saw my videos, she would probably ask YouTube to take it down because of the stuff I was saying in commentary in between. And also, it might be considered, infringement of some sort. But, this is commentary, fair use, fair use, fair use. You know, when I think about my experiences online as a Black person, you know, uh, it's the internet has changed my life, right? I would not be able to live in Budapest, Hungary. I would not have been able to travel the world. I would not have been able to meet my wife had it not been for the internet. The internet is literally something that my life will be totally different without, right? And I'm grateful for the invention of the internet. And I think all of us are, to some degree, grateful that we have the opportunity to learn, grow, be entertained, discover new things because of this wonderful invention that's readily cheap and available for everybody, right? The internet is a gift and a curse, right? And it's more of a curse sometimes for people who do not fit into the the dominant society's norms, right? So, like, if you're a Black person living in a white supremacist America, going online, you will see instances and reflections of white supremacist America bleeding over. And of course, that doesn't mean just overt racism like the N-word and stuff like that, but that is very prevalent online as well. If you've ever been on Twitter, if you've scroll through the deepest, darkest parts of the internet, if you're generally perusing YouTube and stuff like that, you can find very hateful content out there, and something needs to be done about this. I generally agree with Jessie Daniels's methodology of analyzing these websites like Stormfront and the websites of these other white supremacists who put their information basically online. I just wish that, at that time she did more research on Facebook, right? Because in 2009, Facebook was alive. Like, I got my first invitation to Facebook in what, 2007. Like my girlfriend got like, this was back, I'm old. I remember when you had to get an invite to go on Facebook, right? And I'm pretty sure by 2009 there were already hate groups on Facebook. There was a KKK and neo Nazis and stuff like that. So while Stormfront is a good website to analyze because it has, tens of thousands of visitors every single day and a very active community, analyzing social media even in 2009 in its nascent stages would have been very relevant to this book. Like looking at MySpace, looking at Facebook, looking at Friendster, looking at hell, even Black Planet. I'm sure there was a white supremacist on Black Planet trying to get some Georgia peaches or whatever, if you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, still, the book is very relevant on covering the things that the reasons why white supremacy will continue to exist unless we actively do something about it. And I like that she acknowledges that in this book, because this is something I say for a long time, but a lot of people aren't hearing me. A lot of people aren't listening. The next generation of young people that are born are not becoming less racist. Hell, they're taking on even more virulent forms of racism, because now what the young white boys want to do, what some young white boys want to do, is strap a streaming camera to their helmet, wearing a bunch of tactical gear, and run into a mosque and try to run the numbers up higher than Brandon Tarrant, right? This is a trend among some of the white boys as well. And they are getting turned out and turned on to this stupid ideology through 4chan, through Twitter, through YouTube, through Facebook, and all this sort of stuff. No, we shouldn't just shut up about it. No, we as black people definitely should not shut up about it. There are some people who are saying reading about racism creates more racism. I don't even want to dignify myself by even trying to respond to that, but no, nobody would say the same thing about Palestine. If I were up here talking about Gaza all day, nobody would say, you talking about Gaza is creating the apartheid state in Israel even more. That's stupid as hell. So the same thing applies here to racism and white supremacy. We have to continually press the line about it, because these people work day and night over it. You get what I'm saying? So we should be equally as hardworking. The only way we can beat the white supremacists at their game is if we outwork them, outthink them, out-propagandize them. That's what we have to do. And we do need to train the next generation of young people to be able to read the internet, see disinformation and misinformation, and identify it. But we also need to make sure that older people as well who are online, are challenged in their beliefs and are educated as well. It's never too late to learn. It's never too late. You're never too old to learn a new language. Pick up that book you've always wanted to read. Try to do yoga or some exercise, whatever. You get what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? Like, nobody's too old to actually open up their minds. We all have the ability to learn, and so older people need to as well. But I do think we also everywhere around the world, there should be laws against misinformation and disinformation online. Spreading negative propaganda about races of people that can be empirically proven to be false, like black people naturally got bigger dicks, or black people are naturally less intelligent, or black people X, Y, and Z, whatever you're thinking of. All that stuff needs to be erased from online, right? Because we're continuing to perpetuate white supremacy online when we allow this misinformation to spread. And websites like Google, Instagram, uh, Facebook, whatever, I know they're all owned by the same three white guys, but you get what I'm saying, right? All these websites should be held accountable for what is on there. So if somebody is on X posting up Nazi paraphernalia all day and propaganda all day, X should be held accountable. Ilona Muskie should be held equally as accountable as that white supremacist online. Both of them should be held to task for that. So yeah, that's my opinion. Going here to the comments, Ozzy says, excellent work, Simon, and of course, the author. Yes, shout out to Jesse Daniels as well. Once again, everybody, purchase her book. It's a dope book. It's a dope book. Ozzy says, everything she wrote is still relevant in 2024. It may be even worse these days. Yeah, I would say it's, you know, this was written in 2009, so the Black Lives Matter hashtag didn't start. But there's also been, so many things that have transpired in that decade and change since this book was published. So in a lot of ways, it has gotten worse, because we had the Christchurch mosque shooting, we had the Tops shooting, we had the shooting in El Paso. We've had Dylan Roof and all these people that were turned out and turned up because of what they found online, right? So in some ways, some tragedies have happened. But also, I would say there has been a lot of pushback against their ideas, right? Because when George Floyd was killed, and when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and when Breonna Taylor were killed, Black Lives Matter was in full effect, and we had a lot of sympathetic non-white people on that side as well. Now, of course, that racial reckoning of that summer of 2021, right, is or 2020 or whatever year that was, right, is not enough to actually try to, defeat white supremacy in total. But there has been a lot of online activism since then, right? For whatever people want to say about Black Lives Matter, I will always rep that hashtag, Black Lives Matter. I know it's not in vogue. I know the organization has sort of tarnished the legacy of this important movement, but we'll never forget what Black Lives Matter means. That we want in America not only Black lives to matter, we want all people's lives to matter. But in America, Black lives are treated as if they don't. When we're slaughtered by the police, when we're treated unfairly in schools and in hospitals. I know Black Lives Matter is not the hot thing to say right now, but I'll never put down that hashtag. I'll never put down the hashtag of stay woke as well. Whatever people want to say about woke because the right wing has turned it into a slur, I'll always say it's a good thing to be woke because it's better than being asleep. It's better than being asleep, and it's better than being a sheep to right wing reactionary conservative politics or conservative talking points or points of views, right? So I think on one hand, the internet has also allowed our voices to push back against white supremacy. But, it's an ebb and flow. We're in a war. Some battles were lost, like Twitter getting sold out to Elon Musk, and now all the 4chan goons are running it. That's wild, right? But I still got Simon Hill Keeps It Trail on my YouTube channel. Even if I get demonetized, even if I get taken down, I'll always be out here posting up my content and my propaganda because I don't do this for money. I don't do this for clout. I don't do this for fame. I do this because it's important work to fight against these sorts of evil, wicked ideas. And that's really all I got to say. Book React 1 is finished. Shout out to everybody once again. If you think there's a good book for me to read for this series, send it to me or send me the name and we will try to cover it. Reading, doing the Book React series takes a lot of time. So, it's not like the movie reviews. You watch one movie in an hour and a half and then you're able to talk about it for an hour and a half, right? Reading a book takes more effort. And to be frank, this is a shorter book. I know it's like 275 pages, but honestly, it's only about, I would say, 200 pages long. I only read about 200 pages because skipping the notes, skipping the appendix, skipping the acknowledgments, we cut out a lot of pages in the content and just got to the meat and potatoes. But, reading a book for this channel will require a lot more effort, but it's something I will continue to do if you guys like it. So, yeah, that's really all I got to say. My name is Simon Hill. I keep it trill. Peace. Shout out to Jessie Daniels. Buy her book and stay tuned. All right. Ciao.